I pulled into my driveway after 7 days of volunteering at a rural animal rescue, my back aching and my clothes smelling faintly of pine needles and wet dogs. I was 64, a widow of 10 years, and all I wanted was a hot shower and my own bed. Instead, I found my 2 vintage suitcases dumped on the front porch like trash. My favorite gardening boots and a small box of my keepsakes were stacked haphazardly on top. Before I could even reach the top step, the front door swung open. My daughter-in-law Sarah stood in the doorway holding her phone up to record me. She tossed a glossy pamphlet that hit my chest and fluttered to the porch floor. I looked down. It was a brochure for a local nursing home. "You're old, and your questions about money stress us out." Sarah sneered, not bothering to lower her voice for the neighbors. "Move out. We need space." I looked past her. My son David stood in the hallway. He did not meet my eyes. He simply stared at the hardwood floor, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, letting his wife lock his mother out of her own home. I did not scream. I did not cry. I had spent 30 years managing a household, raising a child alone after my husband passed, and maintaining this property. Panic was not a luxury I indulged in. I looked at the brochure on the ground, then looked directly into Sarah's phone camera. I smiled faintly. Without a single word, I picked up my suitcases, turned around, and walked back to my car. I loaded my belongings into the trunk, got into the driver's seat, and backed out of the driveway. I saw Sarah smirking in the rearview mirror, victorious. They had no idea they had just destroyed their own future. I checked into a modest roadside motel 2 towns over. The room smelled of old carpet and industrial cleaner, but the bed was clean and the Wi-Fi was strong. I sat at the small laminate desk, opened my laptop, and took a deep breath. 2 years ago, I had allowed David and Sarah to move into my home rent-free so they could save for a down payment. Over those 24 months, Sarah had slowly taken over. First, it was my kitchen. Then, it was the living room furniture. Finally, it was my peace of mind. I had tolerated it because David was my son. That tolerance ended the moment my suitcases hit the porch. I logged into my bank account. The joint checking account I had set up for household expenses, the one I funded with $2,000 every month, was the first to go. I transferred the entire balance back to my personal account. Next, I opened my smart home application. I owned the house outright. Every utility, every service, every smart device was registered in my name. I tapped the screen, disabling the high-speed internet router. I accessed the smart thermostat, turned off the central heating, and locked the control panel with a new passcode. I wasn't finished. I logged into the utility portal and requested an immediate suspension of the water heater service, a feature installed just last year. Finally, I canceled the authorized user privileges on my credit card, the card David used for their car insurance, gas, and Sarah's expensive grocery runs. I closed my laptop at midnight. The motel room was quiet. I pulled the thin blanket up to my chin and fell into a deep, uninterrupted sleep, knowing exactly what tomorrow would bring. By morning, they were screaming. I woke up at 7, brewed a cup of terrible motel coffee, and turned on my phone. It immediately began vibrating across the nightstand. 17 missed calls, 24 text messages, 4 voicemails. I sipped my coffee and listened to the first voicemail. "Josephine, what is wrong with the Wi-Fi?" Sarah's voice was high-pitched and frantic. "I have a Zoom meeting in 10 minutes and the house is freezing. Turn the heat back on right now." The second voicemail was 20 minutes later. "Mom." David's voice trembled. "The shower is freezing cold. The thermostat is locked. Sarah is losing her mind. Did you do something? Please call me back." The third was Sarah again, dropping any pretense of manners. "Turn the internet back on. You can't just leave and shut off the house. We live here. Fix this." I deleted the voicemails. I felt a profound sense of clarity. For 2 years, I had tiptoed around my own kitchen, keeping quiet, while Sarah complained about the smell of my cooking, moving out of the way, while she redecorated my living room. I had paid the bills while they lived like guests in a luxury hotel. I finished my coffee dressed in a comfortable pair of jeans and a warm sweater and packed my bags. I checked out of the motel at 8:30. I knew David and Sarah had to leave for work by 8:45, regardless of whether they had hot water or internet. They both worked in corporate offices downtown. I drove back toward my neighborhood, taking the scenic route. The morning air was crisp and clear. The problems that had weighed on my chest for 2 years were gone. Now it was time to clean my house. I pulled into my driveway at 9:15. The house was dead quiet. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air was chilly, exactly as I had set it. I did not waste time. I walked straight to the kitchen and grabbed a box of heavy-duty black trash bags. Then I headed upstairs to the master bedroom, my old bedroom, which Sarah had claimed 6 months ago because it had a better view. I started with the bathroom. I swept Sarah's expensive skincare bottles, her curling irons, and her makeup brushes into a bag. I did not break anything, but I was not gentle. Next came the closet. I pulled David's suits and Sarah's dresses off the hangers, folding them quickly and dropping them into separate bags. By noon, I had packed their entire existence into 20 black bags. I dragged them down the stairs and pushed them out into the garage. They knew the keypad code for the garage door, so they could retrieve their belongings without ever stepping foot inside my home. Then I opened my phone and searched for a local locksmith. A man named Greg arrived within 30 minutes. I paid him in cash to replace the deadbolts on the front door, the back patio door, and the internal door leading from the garage to the kitchen. "Lost your keys, ma'am?" Greg asked, drilling in the new brass fixture. "Just upgrading the security," I replied smoothly. When he left, I locked every door. I reset the smart home system, turning the heat back on and firing up the water heater for myself. I made a cup of Earl Grey tea, sat in my favorite armchair, and looked around my living room. It belonged to me again. While scrubbing the baseboards in the guest room, a room Sarah had effectively turned into her personal storage unit over the past 2 years, I found the boxes. They were tucked meticulously behind a row of heavy winter coats in the deep recesses of the walk-in closet. 5 large, pristine boxes still wrapped in ribbons from high-end designer boutiques. I pulled them out one by one, setting them on the bed I had bought with my late husband. I opened the top box. Inside, resting on a bed of velvet tissue paper, was a leather handbag that easily cost more than my first car. The original receipt was still tucked into the interior pocket. I pulled it out and adjusted my reading glasses. The date on the receipt was from just 3 weeks ago. For 2 entire years, David had sat at my kitchen table, rubbing his temples and looking exhausted. He had told me they were struggling to get ahead. He had explained that the housing market was brutal. Inflation was eating their paychecks, and they just needed a few more months of rent-free living to build their savings for a modest starter home. I had believed him. Because he was my son, I had covered their electric bills, paid for their internet, and bought their weekly groceries so they could save. I opened the other boxes. Designer heels that had never touched pavement. A luxury watch still in its protective plastic. 3 silk scarves that cost more than a month's utilities. Sarah hadn't been saving for a house. She had been using my home and my good nature as a free subsidy for her luxury lifestyle. And my son had either enabled it or been foolish enough to ignore it. A cold, hard resolve settled deep in my chest. I didn't shed a single tear. Instead, I carefully placed the lids back on the boxes. I carried them downstairs to the garage and arranged them deliberately on top of the black trash bags holding their clothes. I wanted those designer logos to be the very first thing Sarah saw when the garage door opened. I walked back inside, wiped down the kitchen counters, and threw away the expensive half-empty artisanal oat milk Sarah always demanded I keep in the fridge. I reclaimed my space inch by inch, breathing in the quiet of my own home. I did not feel like a victim. I felt like a homeowner who had finally finished a long overdue renovation. Now, all I had to do was wait for the clock to strike 5. At exactly 5:30, the familiar heavy rumble of David's sedan pulling into the driveway broke the afternoon silence. I stood by the kitchen window, safely hidden behind the wooden blinds, and watched the reality of my decisions unfold. They walked up the front path as if they still owned the world. David stepped up to the front door and turned his key in the lock. It jammed immediately. He pulled it out, frowned at the metal, and tried again, pushing harder. Sarah rolled her eyes, pushed him aside with a huff of impatience, and shoved her own key into the deadbolt. She jiggled the handle aggressively, her expensive acrylic nails clicking against the brass. When it didn't budge, her frustration boiled over. She began pounding the flat of her hand against the heavy wooden door, the sound echoing through the quiet neighborhood. I walked to the living room window, unlatched the lock, and slid the glass open exactly 2 inches. The crisp, biting evening air slipped into the warm room. Josephine Sarah yelled instantly, spotting me through the narrow crack. Her face was flushed red with entitlement. "Open this door, right now. What is wrong with this lock?" I looked down at her, entirely unbothered, sipping the last of my tea. "I changed them." "You can't do that. We live here," she shrieked, stamping her foot on the porch. "You lived here?" I corrected her gently, my voice never rising above a calm, conversational tone. Yesterday, you stood on that exact spot and told me to move out because you needed space. I decided you were absolutely right. You do need space, so I gave it to you. Your belongings are in the garage. The keypad code is the same. Do not try to open this front door again. Mom, please. David stepped forward, his voice cracking with sudden panic. You can't just kick us out on the street without notice. We don't have anywhere to go tonight. You are a 30-year-old man, David. You both work full-time corporate jobs, I replied, staring directly into my son's eyes. Figure it out. I'll call the authorities. I'll report you. Sarah threatened, yanking her phone out of her purse and pointing it at the window like a weapon. Go ahead, I told her smoothly. The deed is in my name alone. All the utility bills are in my name. You have no lease, you pay absolutely no rent, and you have never received mail here in your name. You are guests who have severely overstayed your welcome. Make the call if you want. I didn't wait for her to dial. I slid the window shut, locked it tight, and walked back to my kitchen to start dinner. I roasted a chicken for dinner, filling the house with the scent of rosemary and garlic, ingredients Sarah had banned because she claimed they ruined the air quality. Outside, the evening grew dark and cold. From the kitchen window, I watched them sitting in David's sedan. The interior light was on. Sarah was tapping furiously on her phone, her mouth moving in angry, rapid bursts. She was trying to book a hotel. A moment later, I saw her throw her phone against the dashboard. The credit card had declined. I knew it would. I had canceled the authorized user card the night before, and because David deposited his paycheck into their joint account, which Sarah managed and drained for her luxury purchases, they had no liquid cash. The safety net I had woven for them was gone. They sat in the driveway for 2 hours. Neither of them made a move to open the garage and get their clothes. They were paralyzed by the sudden reality of their choices. I sat at my dining table, ate my roasted chicken, and read a novel. I did not check my phone. I did not pace the floor. I had spent decades making sure my son had a warm bed, a full stomach, and a safe roof over his head. I had done my job. I was no longer responsible for shielding him from the consequences of his own weakness, nor was I responsible for his wife's cruelty. At 9 o'clock, the security motion light above the driveway clicked on. I rinsed my plate in the sink, dried my hands on a towel, and waited. The next move was theirs. A soft, hesitant knock came from the back patio door. I turned on the porch light. David stood there alone, his shoulders hunched against the night chill. He looked exhausted. I unlocked the sliding door and opened it a few inches, keeping the security chain engaged. "Mom," he whispered, his breath visible in the cold air. "Please. Sarah is freezing. We don't have enough money in the checking account for a hotel. We need to come inside." "No." He blinked, stunned by the finality of the word. "Mom, it's me. I know who you are, David. You are the man who stood silently while your wife threw my keepsakes onto the porch and handed me a nursing home brochure. You chose your side." She was just stressed, he pleaded, rubbing his hands together. "She didn't mean it. She meant every word, and you let her say it." I looked at my son, feeling a profound ache, but I kept my voice steady. "You make a good salary, David. Where is your money?" He looked down. "Sarah handles the accounts. She said we were saving." "Look in the garage, David. Look at the boxes she hid in the guest room. That is where your savings went. I am not your bank anymore. I am not your maid. And I am not giving up my home." I reached to a hook by the door, grabbed an old, heavy winter coat he had left behind years ago, and pushed it through the gap in the door. "Sleep in the car. Tomorrow, find an apartment." I shut the glass door, slid the lock into place, and walked upstairs to my own warm bed. The sun rose bright and unforgiving the next morning. I made myself a cup of tea and stood by the front window. The driveway was a battlefield. David had opened the garage to find the designer boxes stacked on top of their trash bags. The realization had finally pierced through his passivity. He stood holding a $2,000 handbag, actually yelling at Sarah. Sarah screamed back, waving her arms, pointing at the house, pointing at David. She was furious that her lifestyle had collapsed overnight, and she blamed him for not forcing me to let them back in. I sipped my tea. I did not intervene. I did not open the door to mediate. That was their marriage, their financial ruin, and their problem. 10 minutes later, a silver sedan pulled up to the curb. Sarah grabbed 2 of the designer boxes, shoved David hard in the chest, and marched toward the Uber. She got in, slammed the door, and the car sped away, leaving David standing in the driveway, surrounded by black trash bags and a life he had broken. He sat down on one of the bags and put his head in his hands. I unlocked the front door and stepped out onto the porch. David looked up, his eyes red and swollen. He looked like a lost little boy waiting for his mother to come fix his mistakes. "Clear the driveway, David," I said firmly. "The garbage truck comes tomorrow morning. Anything left outside will be taken." I turned around, went back inside, and locked the door behind me. 6 months later, my house was exactly how I wanted it. The garden was thriving. The kitchen smelled of rosemary, and the guest room was converted into a small sewing studio. David lived in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment across town. Sarah had filed for divorce the moment she realized there was no hidden trust fund to tap into. Without my credit cards and my rent-free house, their marriage lasted exactly 3 weeks. David had to sell his car to cover the debt she had accumulated in his name. He came over occasionally on Sunday afternoons. He would sit in my living room, drink coffee, and apologize for what he had let happen. I always accepted his apologies, but I never offered him his old room back. "I'm learning how to budget," he told me one afternoon, looking at a spreadsheet on his phone. "It's hard." "It is," I agreed, taking a sip of my tea. "But it's yours." When 5 o'clock rolled around, I stood up and gathered the empty coffee cups. "It was nice seeing you, David. I have an early shift at the animal rescue tomorrow." He understood the cue. He put on his jacket, hugged me briefly, and walked out the front door. I watched him drive away in his cheap, used car. I loved my son, but I loved my peace more. I locked the deadbolt, turned off the porch light, and smiled. Family is important, but a woman's dignity and her own set of keys is absolutely essential. I didn't share this story today to boast about locking my own son out of the house. The truth is, that afternoon on the porch broke my heart a little. But as parents and as people who just want to help, we often confuse unconditional love with unconditional tolerance. For years, I thought giving them everything and staying quiet was the right thing to do. I thought I was helping them build a future, but I realized something important. When you constantly shield grown adults from the consequences of their own choices, you aren't helping them. You're just delaying their reality. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone, and the most necessary thing you can do for your own mental health, is to simply step out of their way and let them fall. Boundaries aren't an act of cruelty. They are an act of self-respect. Your home, your finances, and your peace of mind are not playgrounds for someone else's entitlement. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had to make a painful but necessary choice to protect your own peace, I would love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. I read every single one of them.